I get asked all the time, Joe, what do you really think about Islam? And honestly, I get why people are curious because I've had Muslims on my show. I've had ex-Muslims, I've had Christians, atheists, neuroscientists, historians, you name it. And every time Islam comes up, it's like people perk up. There's this mystery, this controversy, this tension around the religion. Now, I'm not Muslim. I'm not here to preach it. I'm not here to condemn it either. What I try to do on the podcast and in my own life is just figure out what's real. I want to know what's actually going on because the media gives you one picture, the people give you another picture, and then when you sit down with someone who's actually practicing, they'll blow your mind with stories that don't match any of the stereotypes. So my relationship with Islam, or at least my curiosity about it, really comes from that place, wanting to strip away the headlines and the memes and figure out what the hell is true, misconceptions and media narratives. Let's be real, if you're an American kid growing up in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, Islam isn't introduced to you through philosophy books. It's not introduced to you through the Quran. You don't get Muhammad, peace be upon him, in your history class in a deep way. What you get is terrorism. You get oil wars. You get this clash of civilizations narrative. So I grew up with the same mental picture a lot of people did. Islam equals strict rules, scary stuff, violence. It was almost cartoonish the way it was presented. And if that's your only exposure, then yeah, you're going to form an opinion that's based on fear and not understanding. But here's the thing, when you actually meet Muslims, when you actually talk to people who pray 5 times a day, who fast during Ramadan, who dedicate themselves to this way of life, you realize real quick that the media version is garbage. It's like watching a UFC highlight reel and thinking, you know what training camp is like. You've seen the knockouts, but not the discipline, not the philosophy, not the lifestyle. Conversations with guests. Over the years, I've had conversations with people who've really opened my eyes about Islam. Some were scholars, some were regular folks, some were celebrities who converted, and every single time I walk away thinking, man, this is way more nuanced than I thought. For example, I had one guest explain the concept of Tawheed, the oneness of God. And the way he broke it down, it wasn't about some old man in the sky. It wasn't like the cartoons of religion that atheists like to mock. It was about ultimate reality. It was about the fact that everything is connected, everything comes from one source, and your job as a human is to live in harmony with that truth. That doesn't sound crazy. That sounds like something you'd hear from a Buddhist monk or even a physicist talking about the unified field theory. It's profound. Then another time I had a guest explain Ramadan. And dude, the science geek in me lit up. Because we know fasting has insane benefits. Autophagy, insulin sensitivity, brain health, longevity. And Muslims have been doing it for 1400 years as a spiritual practice. Before it was trendy, before it was in biohacking podcasts, they were already living it. That made me step back and go, wait a second, how much other wisdom is hidden in this religion that people just ignore because of bad PR? Islamic philosophy. Now, I've always been into philosophy, whether it's Marcus Aurelius, Alan Watts, or whoever, and one thing people don't realize is how much Western thought owes to Islamic thinkers. You hear the name Averroes ibn Rushd, or Avicenna ibn Sina. These guys were Muslims, and they were the reason Europe got exposed to Aristotle and Plato during the so-called Dark Ages. While Europe was burning witches, Baghdad was building libraries. That's the kind of stuff that doesn't get taught in school. And when you find out, it flips the whole us versus them narrative. You start to realize, oh wait, this isn't some alien religion that's against knowledge. It's actually a tradition that preserved knowledge when the West was losing its grip. And for me, that makes Islam not just a religion, but a civilization that has shaped humanity in ways we don't acknowledge. Spiritual discipline. Another thing that blows my mind about Islam is the discipline. Look, I train, I roll in jiu-jitsu. I know what it's like to have to show up consistently, to push yourself when you don't feel like it. But imagine that on a spiritual level, praying 5 times a day, every day, no excuses, fasting an entire month, every year, giving charity as an obligation, not just when you feel generous. That's structure, that's commitment. And part of me really respects that because in the modern world, we're drowning in distraction. People can't put their phones down. They can't stop scrolling TikTok for 10 minutes. And here's this religion saying, stop, face the ground. Remember, you're not the center of the universe. That's powerful, man. Whether you believe in God or not, that kind of humility practice, it'll change you. comparing to the West. Now, let's be honest, a lot of people in the West look at Islam and think it's backward. They'll point at countries where women don't have rights or where there's dictatorship and they'll say, see, that's Islam. But that's like saying Christianity is represented by the Crusades or the Inquisition. It's lazy thinking. You've got to separate what people do politically from what the actual scripture teaches. When I started actually reading some parts of the Quran or listening to people who had studied it, I realized this book is not encouraging oppression. It's not encouraging stupidity. It's talking about justice. It's talking about humility. It's talking about accountability. Now, does every Muslim country live up to that? Hell no. But neither does America live up to the Constitution. The ideals are one thing, the practice is another. Personal takeaway so far. So when people ask me, Joe, what do you believe about Islam? My honest answer is this. I believe it's one of the most misunderstood traditions in the modern world. I believe it's got layers of wisdom that can benefit anyone, even if you're not Muslim. And I believe that if we cut through the stereotypes, we'd see that Muslims aren't living in some alien reality. They're wrestling with the same human struggles we all are, but through a very disciplined, very structured framework. And as a guy who's always chasing truth, always trying to improve, I can't help but respect that. I laid out how my curiosity about Islam started, misconceptions, media distortion, my podcast conversations, the discipline of Muslims, and how Western philosophy owes a lot to Islamic scholars. But here's the thing, that's just scratching the surface. Once you dig deeper into Islam, not just the stereotypes, not just the surface level stuff, you start to realize how incredibly layered it is. And that's what I want to talk about here. The science, the family structure, the role of women, the spiritual psychology, and ultimately what I personally respect and believe about Islam. Science and Islam, let's start with the science. People forget that for hundreds of years, Muslims were at the forefront of scientific discovery. Algebra, Muslim mathematicians. Hospitals, pioneered by Muslims. Astronomy, medicine, architecture, you name it. Now here's what blows my mind. Muslims didn't see science as a contradiction to faith. They saw it as a way to understand God better. Like if God created the universe, then studying the universe is just studying his work. That's such a different mindset from the stereotype people have of religion being anti-science. And it makes me wonder, what if the West had kept that attitude? What if instead of separating science and spirituality, we saw them as two sides of the same coin, prayer and the body? Another thing that really gets me is the physicality of prayer in Islam. When Muslims pray, they go through movements, standing, bowing, prostrating, sitting, and people think it's just ritual. But if you look at it from a physiological perspective, it's like yoga. It's like active meditation. When you put your forehead on the ground in sujood, that's not just symbolic humility. It also increases blood flow to the brain. It puts your body in a posture of surrender, which has psychological effects, and then doing that 5 times a day. Dude, that's like a built-in stress release system. Imagine if instead of scrolling Twitter, every couple of hours you stopped, disconnected, and physically humbled yourself. I bet mental health numbers would skyrocket in the right direction. Fasting beyond Ramadan. I mentioned Ramadan in part 1, but I want to go deeper, because fasting isn't just about not eating, it's about control. It's about mastering your impulse. You know how many people are slaves to food, to caffeine, to sugar. And here's this system where every year you practice letting go of those cravings. That's resilience training. That's discipline for the soul. And the science backs it up. Fasting repairs cells, improves brain function, reduces inflammation. It's wild. But Muslims didn't need a lab to prove it. They already knew it had benefits because they felt it. Family and community. Now let's talk about family. One of the things I notice about the modern West is how disconnected people are. Kids grow up glued to iPads, parents are burned out, everyone's chasing money, and there's not much structure holding people together. In Islam, family is central. Respecting your parents is a religious duty. Taking care of your kids isn't optional, it's sacred. The idea of community, is huge. You're not just an individual floating through life, you're part of something bigger, and I think we underestimate how much people need that. We're suffering in the West from loneliness, depression, suicide rates going up. People don't feel like they belong, and here's this religion that says you belong, you're connected, you're responsible for each other. That's not oppression, that's protection. The role of women. Okay, this is the hot button issue. Every time Islam comes up, People in the West say, but what about women? Aren't they oppressed? Now let's be real, there are places in the world where women are treated horribly, and those governments or cultures try to justify it with religion. But if you actually read Islamic history, you find something different. Prophet Muhammad's wife, Khadijah, was a successful businesswoman. Women had property rights in Islam centuries before women in Europe did. Education is emphasized for both men and women. The hijab, people see it as oppression, but a lot of Muslim women describe it as empowerment. It's their choice, their identity, their way of not being objectified. So again, there's a difference between cultural abuse and what the religion itself says. And I think we in the West get it twisted, because we project our own lens onto it. Justice and accountability. One of the things I respect most about Islam is the focus on justice. Like on the Day of Judgment, every action is accounted for. You don't just get away with screwing people over because you were rich or because you had power. Everyone answers to God. That's a powerful concept. Because in this world, people get away with murder, corruption, greed, exploitation. It all seems to go unchecked. But in Islam, there's this built-in accountability that says, nope, you're not escaping, maybe not in this life, but definitely in the next. And I think even if you don't believe in God, the psychological impact of believing you'll be held accountable makes you act differently. It keeps you humble. Why billions follow it? So why do billions of people stick with Islam? It's not fear. It's not brainwash. It's because it gives structure to life. It answers questions that science can't. It creates community. It gives you tools to master yourself. And honestly, if a system works, if it helps people live better, healthier, more connected lives, then you've got to respect it, even if you don't adopt it yourself. My honest belief. So here's my bottom line. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not here to convert anyone. But what I really believe about Islam is this. It's one of the most disciplined, structured, and misunderstood systems in the world. It has wisdom that lines up with science. It has practices that make people healthier, stronger, more grounded. And it's not the cartoon villain that the media makes it out to be. I believe that if more people actually took the time to understand Islam, not from CNN, not from Twitter, but from Muslims themselves, we'd have way less hate, way less fear, and way more respect. And for me, as a guy who's always trying to figure out how to live better, how to push boundaries, how to stay real, I see a lot in Islam that resonates. I may not practice it, but I can damn sure appreciate it. Closing, at the end of the day, what I really believe about Islam is this. It's not perfect. Nothing human is, but it's powerful, it's profound, and it deserves to be understood on its own terms, not through someone else's agenda. Maybe, just maybe, if we opened our minds a little more, we'd realize that Islam isn't the other. It's another path that billions of people are walking to try to live a good life. And that's something I think we can all respect.